Welcome to our monthly ACTS Town Hall. Thanks to our member companies for helping make these town halls possible. Your support makes our mission a reality. Together in safety, stronger in collaboration. The ACTS Town Halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. These town halls are meant to be a discussion, and you're encouraged to ask questions and share solutions. A recording of this town hall will be posted on our YouTube channel and sent via email after the town hall has concluded. Before the end of the town hall, each of our panelists will highlight a moving forward step to ensure we stay focused on practical and impactful solutions. We are pleased to have a knowledgeable and experienced panel with us today. So to get us started, our moderator will begin with brief introductions.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining Shifting Mindsets Beyond the Locate, the role of the damage prevention specialist. Today we've got a good crew of gentlemen that represent the excavation contracting ground disturbance professional industry, and we have also 4 people or gentlemen that represent the private locating industry, namely myself, Mike, Dustin, and Donovan, and Randy represents excavators or drillers for that matter. And, I guess we'll get started to talk about, the differences between a private locator and a damage prevention specialist and how that all relates to risk when we're working on private property. There's a lot of unknowns with regards to our industry, and it's not very well known. It is to some, but not many, because our industry is non-regulated. We don't have an association until the North American Private Utility Association came along, and we're just bringing awareness to what we do. So I guess I'll introduce myself first before we move on. My name is Grant Perrine. I'm with the North American Private Utility Association. I'm the executive director, and Know Before You Dig Locates. I'm a contract private locator, and I've been in this industry for about 36 years, and I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way, unfortunately, and that's what we're doing with NAPUA is the acronym for our association, to bring awareness to what we do, but to help people not make the mistakes that a lot of us here on this panel today have made over the last many years in our careers. So I'll pass that over to Randy to introduce himself.
Hi, Randy Goodwin from Toronto. My background is in geoscience, primarily soil and groundwater contamination, and in my role, I manage drilling contractors. We act as a drilling contractor. I manage drilling crews who are going out to sites, operating equipment that are borehole drilling, soil sampling, installing groundwater monitoring wells for site investigations related to contamination or geotechnical investigations.
Mike?
Yeah, hi everybody. Mike Iadanza with Mason Private Locating. I'm out of New York, but coming from you at an airport in Charleston, South Carolina right now. We are a private locate company that we do what we say, right? It's we serve throughout the country, mainly looking for privately owned utilities. I've been in this industry quite a while, and I've been on both sides of the fence, meaning the public side and the private side. So my knowledge comes from a little bit of both standpoints and understand the vast differences and challenges of both.
Dustin?
Yeah, Dustin Schneider. I work for Bloodhound. I am the operations manager for Texas. I cover Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Same background like Mike. I was on the public side, came over to the private side. I have about 16 years in the industry. We are also a nationwide company offering ground penetrating radar, EM locating, and private locating services.
Thanks, Dustin. Donovan?
Donovan Busta. I'm the Regional Business Development Manager for Safe Site Utility Services. And like Mike and Dustin, I I too spent my time on the public side as well as the private side. Been in the business going on 16 years, so got a lot of experience across mostly the South and Southwest and West Coast, and been in many states and know the ins and outs of the business on both sides. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Donovan. So we'll get started. I think one of the biggest challenges we have as an industry, of the private locate industry, is not many people, especially the ones coming into the industry, know what we do. 811 is great. Or one call systems up in Canada. There's a lot of awareness around those large marketing campaigns. But when you get on private property, yes, there's publicly owned services, but there's a lot more privately owned services, and that's that's what we specialize in. And so I want to start by talking to Randy to find out, Randy, the clients that you drill for, you don't commission a private locator. You usually hand it over a locate from a private locate contractor, and the 811 or the one call package for public locates. And my question to you is, what do you teach your crews, or what do you do for your crews to make sure that when they receive those packages, what kind of training do they need to make sure that that's a good locate? Do they just assume that everything is good on the page, or what steps do they go through when they're on site to really understand that they're safe to drill or dig?
Thanks, Grant. As a bit of a background, our company, our first involvement with a project is normally when we show up at a site where somebody has kind of scoped some sort of a site investigation, and with their client, we're primarily working for engineering consultants, environmental consultants. They are doing an investigation for some reason, perhaps soil contamination or geotechnical testing for infrastructure or construction, that sort of thing. So those people have done the utility locates in terms of the one call, and commissioning a private locator to come and identify any of the private services at the site. So we don't have any background information on the site until our drill crews show up first thing in the morning, sort of thing. So primarily what happens there is the consultant will present us with the locates that they've looked after obtaining through, as I say, one call and a private locator. And then it's up to our guys, our field guys, to kind of review that documentation before they start drilling. So our guys, although they weren't involved in commissioning the locates and they've never been to the site before, they're kind of put on the spot where they need to make sure and sort of peer review those locates and make sure that that they've been actually done properly, and in terms of both the public utilities and the private locators. So they need to kind of get the lay of the land and sort of check over those locates, because quite often our client, the person who commissioned the locates, may not have adequate training. To them, it may be just sort of a checkbox. Yes, I got my locates, but once our guys start looking at them in detail, they could identify problems. So sort of circling around to your question, Grant, is that our field people need to have training on how to review locates, how to recognize inconsistencies, problems, peer reviewing them. That training is through programs such as Own Your Safety, which is a training program that covers utilities and locating, as well as a lot of on-the-job training, and they're looking at locates every day, pretty much, when they're getting to these sites. So they have to make sure that because it's common that there are problems, and in the realm of private locating, sometimes there's a big variation in the quality of the private locates that they're seeing. So making sure that they're trained to be able to recognize some of the issues that maybe our client has missed.
Thanks, Randy. And Mike, so if you could just walk us through what Randy just talked about. He just described the excavation site as looking for trust and information. They want to know if the information is any good. What does a private locating company have to do differently if the objective is not simply to complete the locate, but to help ground to service professionals like Randy identify and manage any uncertainty? So, can you just walk us through your process of what you guys do on site?
Yeah, and the process for us, the process we put on our homepage, believe it or not, we have a 5-step process that every technician goes through. I'm sure other companies have this as well, but it's like you just want to make sure that if a different locator goes or whatever is happening throughout the country, everything is done being the same way and following that process. A basic locate could get very focused on like getting a single signal, verifying a print, and putting paint on the ground. Well, I think everybody on this panel agrees that we go well beyond that. And an experienced private locate specialist, they're looking at the bigger picture. They're working with Randy and his team. They want to know the scope of the project. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? Let's look at the maps. Do the utilities routes make sense? Where do things leave and enter the building? Are there structures, valves, transformers, any of that we can see? That we could certainly, or any other indicators that we should be there that we shouldn't miss. And I think the biggest thing is when we get on site, we always try to ask the same question is, you're just not asking like, what can I locate? It's more of what could we be missing? Because we're investigators. We're detectives. And a lot of times we get there and we don't know what's there. I mean, we can see some stuff. There might be parking lot lights or transformers here, this and that. But there's that whole other world that really makes up the majority of the stuff under the ground that's privately owned, that was never documented, and all of that. And so the mindset needs to be, turning it into from a locate into a complete damage prevention process. Starts getting out of your truck and kind of looking at all those leading indicators, hooking up to the stuff that using your GPR for the anomalies and the thing you don't know, walking the site a couple more times. And then when you're done, is it just paint and flags? No, we want to get with Randy and his team. We want to talk about not only what we found, or maybe the things that we think might not be accurate, because I think the important thing is every technician has confidence in what they do, but they can't be overly confident, meaning like there's something that could always be missed, and we need to be able to explain and detail that before Randy puts some shovels in the ground just in case.
No, perfect. And so I want to bring everybody back a little bit, because one of the key words you used when you were speaking was verify. And that's a very, very key term in our industry. And I'm going to talk about the public side of things on the 811 side, or the public locators. So when a public locator is locating their lines, whether they work for the utility owner or they're working for a locate service provider that's marking on their behalf, they're given the utility records, and they say, okay, here you go, here's the records, provide a locate. The gas line, we'll use an example, gas main goes from point A to point B, and they do the locate and they verify the record, right? There's the verification. And that's the key difference between the public side, the 811, and what we do. Because sometimes, probably 95% of the time, we have no verification. And that's the key distinction between a public locator and a private locator. Now, the utility owner, in our case, is usually the landowner, whoever owns that building, or whoever's responsible to maintain or operate it.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
Our challenge is, as private locators, is educating that landowner to make sure they understand their role in the whole process. And that's one of the things Randy talked about, was training, is making sure everybody understands their role. Because when we as private locators go into a site like Mike described, and we're totally an investigator, and we're trying to connect the dots and figure everything out, and looking at gas and water and sewer and telecom and all the secondary power and you name it, it can get quite challenging, and then we have to disseminate what's the difference between public and private if the public locates haven't been marked. So it's really challenging. And however, when we show up on site, usually the first question we ask is, has a SUE study been done? If anybody doesn't know what SUE means, it's subsurface utility engineering. Grade standard 38-22 put out by the American Society of Civil Engineers. And I fully support it. And I think if we had a SUE study for every job that we worked on private property, our lives would be tremendously easier. But unfortunately, SUE is usually only performed on large scale projects where big budgets are allocated. And because, at the very beginning of the project, that's when the risk is mitigated on a SUE project. You understand the risk, and we're talking about the life cycle of a project. But we really want to have that SUE study. But when we don't have that SUE study, we really are challenged, and now we have to be that SUE investigator, and we have to do what I call as a tailgate SUE. So now I'm saying, well, do you have records? Okay, if there's records, let me see them. I'm going through piles and piles of records in a drawing room and all that, and having to.
And are they right? How long have those records been, right? Is it at a hospital where there was one building at the time, and now all of a sudden you go back and your Google images showed one building and there's four? It's like, have those records been updated?
Yeah, probably. And those are just records they have at the facility. There might be records with the town for other things. So it gets quite challenging. And, so this is this is what we have to do and that's the real difference between a private locator who just marks what's privately owned and just goes off records, and a damage prevention specialist. And there's a real clear difference between the two. And that's where we are with NAPUA, trying to educate what we do, and why we're trying to bring all the private locate companies together to say, hey, listen, we have to have a common voice to bring up that, that level of delivery, because the contractors, especially the contractors, that are relying on us, sometimes they're not aware of what is good and what is good, what isn't. And that is the biggest challenge we have, is really understanding, getting that point across to, they Google private locator, but that, anybody can put up a flashy website. They don't know what they're getting.
Yeah. And Grant, I say this all the time. We went to a damage at a hospital, and the person came out when they actually hit oxygen lines from the tank leading into it. I mean, that's like a big deal, right? And so I can tell you what they didn't do was come out and go, oh my God, was that a public or private utility they hit, right? They just know something got hit. They don't know the difference. They don't care the difference. They just know that they called in for locates, and for some reason that line was not marked. And so that's why this education is important, because most of them don't know the difference of the two types of utilities. And then one needs to go, you have to go further to get one of those done.
Yeah, and you use the term, you talked about hospitals there, and there's a real clear difference. We do talk about it in our best practices with the PUA, is critical care facilities and large occupancy facilities have to be treated totally different, because they can be very, very complex, and the risk is through the roof. If something is damaged, you don't want to take out a water ring loop at a hospital and shut the whole hospital down for water, something that they really, really need for operating and all those other things. So my next question, I'm going to direct to Dustin, is, once you perform your locate, can you just talk about limitations, or what can limit you to do your job, and how you get that across to your clients, and what do you think they should do? I want to make sure people understand that locating is a process. Everything after that locate is a safety practice. That's very, very clear. And so can you tell me, what do you do as an organization at Bloodhound to help your clients understand those risks or the limitations, or what you could and could not do for them?
Yeah, great question. So what we do right from the start with our clients, we discuss limitations of GPR, right? If there's cars in the parking lot, we won't be able to get adequate scans of the parking lot. If there's anything in the way, such as tall grass in a field or anything of that. So from the beginning point, we are explaining limitations, what we need out of our way to do our job. When a technician goes out, does the job, and if there's any type of issues with finding something, or anything where, hey, GPR is not getting this due to soil conditions, or hey, I couldn't get this area scanned because there's this truck in the way. Right from the get-go, the technician is calling our clients, explaining, hey, this is what's going on. And then from there, we also provide a detailed report, site sketch. On the site sketch, we'll even highlight the areas and say, hey, couldn't get this area due to parked cars or possible water line in this area, could not get due to GPR limitations. And then we also offer other services. So sewer, hey, we have a camera truck that we can come out, put a camera in it, get it dead on the point, accurate. We know it's accurate. Or with water, hey, we do have a soft dig option. We can have a vac truck come out here, do some slot trenching for you, find that utility, expose it so we can get some eyes on it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And it's limitations are the one thing that cause risk to increase on a job. So a limitation is something that the locator could not do, or something that limited them from doing their job properly or adequately. So I'll just talk about a few limitations, and I'll get to Donovan in a sec. Those limitations, and you highlighted a few of them, but the biggest limitation, I think, for us is when we don't have records and we're working blind. I call it a blind locate or an unsupported locate. And because a lot of times when there's a damage, the finger gets pointed at us, and we're not an insurance policy, and neither are our clients. It's really the risk. We'll talk about that, the risk and who owns that risk later on. But the challenge is really making sure you get that limitation point across, or document it well on your locate report. I'm down in Texas, so we don't get snow. But up in the northern areas, a foot of snow on the ground makes a big difference if there's no records. If there's manholes or catch basins, or even appurtenances that we don't know about, like valves, smaller things that can be covered in snow, if we have no records and we can't see those things, it becomes challenging. And then, if something gets missed, then they think, well, how'd you miss that? Or why'd you? So it all comes down to making our clients aware of, not only what we can do for them, but what we need to do it right for them. And that's the biggest challenge is utility records. And unfortunately, our industry, a lot of times we get called, and the famous word they use is, when you're done your job, am I clear to dig? And in locating, that word clear, when you don't have records, can't be used, because clear is an absolute, black or white. We work in shades of gray, unfortunately. And it's really challenging when your client says that. Immediately I go, okay, I need to educate you now to make sure you're aware of what I can and cannot do, and what I'm providing, what kind of information I'm providing them. And that's the clear difference between a private locator and someone that evolves into a damage prevention specialist. Because a DPS is someone that looks at the whole project, looks at everything. You're asking questions. Is there a SU study? And you're working your way down to that operational phase where we're actually digging, where they're going to be digging, right? So when that risk is not mitigated at the beginning of the project, it gets pushed down to the operational phase where we operate, right? So if a SU study is done, then the risk is managed at the beginning of the project, and they know they can incorporate that into the bid package and all that, saying, hey, we couldn't locate this, include a hydrovac or hand dig or whatever. But when that doesn't happen, and this is why I'm a big proponent of SU, when that doesn't happen, then we're hastily having to figure all this stuff out just before they're digging, or right before Randy puts his drill in the ground.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that,
go ahead,
because this, we've talked about limitations a few times here, and limitations does not necessarily mean a bunch of fine print at the bottom of a locate page. Limitations is some of the things that you guys have already talked about, in terms of, well, up here in Toronto it's snow, but also getting access to utility rooms, or various things, and those limitations need to be relayed to people like us, who are going to be the ones putting our auger in the ground. Because first of all, the people that we're working for, perhaps they can do something to help resolve those limitations, whether that's getting the cars moved and the locator coming back, or getting access to utility rooms or something, so that we can improve the knowledge base and the confidence in the locates. And of course, if that's not done, when we get to the site and have to start drilling, that if there's uncertainties and then we need to know about those, because then we can take measures to address that, whether it's whether it's getting some of the updated information kind of on the fly, or whether it's adjusting the location of our boreholes because of the confidence level that the private locator indicated in certain areas of the site, or things like that. So I think it's important to clarify that limitations, as I said at the beginning, is not necessarily just the fine print on the paperwork. It's the limitations in that specific project and what some of the hindrances to a high level of confidence may have been.
Yeah, and a lot of times, that uncertainty still remains, and that's what a limitation does. It creates more risk and more uncertainty. So, Donovan, I want to give you a chance to speak. So when uncertainty still remains, what should they communicate to the ground disturbance professional or the digger, or whoever commissioned the work before excavation proceeds? Like, what are your locators instructed to do? I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I think that can be just as important as all the rest of the process up to that point. Over the years, I've dealt with locators that are very vague in their description after they've completed the locate. I've had locators that will wheel off every locate and say, I went 115 feet this way, I went 115. I accessed this building. I found this cross box. I found this valve stop. I found all of this stuff. When they roll the GPR, they're putting what they think they saw, or, double checking their locates. GPR typically the last thing that you do on a job site, just to verify and look for the anomalies. But it's the communication part of it can be just as important as the actual locate itself. And being available to answer those questions. We do go in there blind. We do go in there a lot of times with zero records. So there's always a sense of, did we get everything? And not knowing all of the unknowns. So I think the communication part at the end of the locate is just as important as the whole process itself.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. And it all comes down to risk and making sure people, because a lot of times when we're hired, they think that hiring a private locator is they're giving away the risk. They're just saying, here, do it. I've done my due diligence. I'm done. And they stop there, not knowing that once we finish our job, they got to look at the information, disseminate it, look at whatever we could or could not do, and to make sure that we got it right. So how do we do that, right? And who's the utility owner? Well, when we do a private locate, not only are we looking at the private side, but we still have to look at the public side of things, because if you're doing a blind locate, we have to mark out those if they're not already marked, right? Because sometimes you get clears from the 811 or whatever. We still have to mark those out, because we are not tracing gas lines or water lines or power lines. We put a current on a line and we trace an electromagnetic field that is placed on that line, and we have no control in congested areas what happens to that signal. It could distort, it could ghost, it could turn and go on a different buried facility. So in order for us to understand the private side, we need to understand the public side. And so we're always looking at both. And by the time we're ending, we end, we should on our drawings have all the public things marked in pink, right? You can't dig on pink. You can't hire a private locator to circumvent the 811 system. That's a no-no. You have to still do 811 and one call up in Canada, and or wherever you are in your region. So, but we as private locators, when we're working blind, we have to know where everything is, because, we have to make sure that we're not bleeding off onto something that's a public utility line, or we're unexpectedly tracing something that is a public utility line. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. And it's important to know what it is, right? So a lot of times we'll get like, hey, well, we white lined, you got like a 10-yard by 10-yard area, whatever. We're like, yeah, that's great. Well, your guy is way outside. And so we'll say, well, we need to follow it. Well, why do you need to follow it? Well, do you want to know if that's a gas line, or do you want to know if that's a 2-inch water line, right? Or an irrigation line, right? So sometimes we need to go beyond that scope and to understand even what it is and being able to follow it. You know, we talk about when things don't reconcile or match up, but I think sometimes the most important thing an experienced locator can actually do is recognize when something's wrong. You know, a strong signal, like you said, Grant, doesn't mean they're on it. The records doesn't mean it's there, right? And if you can't reconcile the information, it's important to at least communicate that uncertainly effectively to a guy like Randy. Because otherwise we just put marks down and then Randy's got this false sense of confidence that this was done. And he's clear, right? And maybe that's not the point. And sometimes the best thing you could do is actually go, we're not sure. But there are other methods, like Dustin said earlier, to be able to kind of expose it, find it, or either prove if something is there or if it's not.
Yeah, and it all comes down to risk mitigation because, you know, I can't tell you how many times I'm going to ask Dustin this question. How many times we've gotten a call and saying, you know, oh, we ask what's the address and they say it's this, and but we're only working we're only drilling one borehole. Well, one borehole at a residence is a lot different than a one borehole at a hospital or one borehole at a mall with 5 buildings, right? So we don't, as private locators, just show up and scan with passive signals and run the GPR over and say you're clear. We don't do that, or a good reputable company doesn't do that. So, but that's what a lot of the ground disturbance professionals or excavators have expected from us, because there are some companies out there, private locator companies, that do that. You know, they roll the dice, or they just don't know any better, and that's why we're trying to make that better. So I guess the next question I'll ask Dustin this question is, what do you do when you have a client that asks you that question? Like, what is your process of when they say, hey, we have one borehole, and then your field tech shows up and they're expecting you, they got a drill rig sitting on site, and, you know, it's one borehole, but it's in the middle of a parking lot of a large mall or something. Like, what's your typical response, Dustin?
Yeah, so when the technician gets on site, obviously we get with the crew first. And if it's something where, hey, I'm in this parking lot, there's storm drain grates everywhere, there's manholes everywhere, it looks like I have duct runs or power duct runs in the parking lot. Once they do their visual scan and their site walks, if they anticipate a problem, like if it's going to take any longer than what was either estimated or told to the client beforehand on site, we immediately call our client, speak with the site contact, inform them of what's going on. And we kind of explain to them as well, right? Like, hey, I know it's just one borehole in a parking lot, but I have a fiber duct run. I have 4 or 5 manholes I need to verify. And it looks like I also have a power duct run. This might take some time, right? Because like everybody said on this call, we're not just going to roll a GPR in a 10 by 10 area and do like a safety or a power sweep or an EM passive sweep and just call it good. We're going to go hook up, clamp, verify everything from point A to point B before we confidently say, hey, this is marked or this is what we've got. But again, it's always communication first. We let the client know, let them know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it before we proceed.
And Randy, that's great, Dustin. And I think Donovan and Mike and myself agree with your process, because, you know, the good companies out there, that's the way to do it. And basically, you know, when Sue came along back, you know, in I think it was the early 90s or mid 90s, I can't remember exactly, but I just remember I've been doing private locates for a very, very long time. And when the Sue standard came out, I remember saying, oh, I do that, you know, because you learn as a business owner quite quickly that if you don't do this process or you don't follow this process, you're going to have damages and you're going to give your clients a false sense of security. And because we're not doing our due diligence. So my question is to Randy, like when you're on site, and this goes back to the very beginning, you know, when you receive a locate that, you know, is in a parking lot at a mall, I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm gonna let you answer it. And it's like, and it's just a drawing with one borehole, and it says cleared. Like, what do you do? What do you instruct your staff to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm just something else I'm just going to clarify before we go on, because we did talk about public and private utilities. It's amazing actually how many people don't even recognize what the difference in those two things are. I countless times I've had people say, "Oh, we don't need public locates. This is all on private property." They don't realize the concept is that no, it's not public versus private property. It's who owns the utility, and if it's a public utility, that's a public that way. Lots of public utilities on private property, of course, because gas service, water service, etc., that are coming on to the property. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to bring that up because that is a common misconception, startlingly. But back to your question, Grant. It's kind of a sniff test for our guys, like they've been on enough sites to kind of recognize when a locate isn't well done, and in your example, that's something that's going to kind of hit them over the head. Is that obviously somebody here did not actually look at well, maybe they did or they didn't document what the lay of the land is in terms of all the utilities there, and have done some sort of a passive scan or something of that area, which, as we know, is can be helpful, but it is not an exhaustive way of determining the location of a utility. And unfortunately, this can create some friction because like you mentioned, a drill rig sitting on site, and we can't drill because our guys recognize that this was not a well done locate, and everybody's paid by the hour, and the client's upset that they're paying for a drill rig to sit there, and the drillers are refusing to drill. But unfortunately, it was a case of where the client wasn't sufficiently educated in utilities and locates to recognize before we came to the site that this utility locate was not well done. And unfortunately, because dealing with a lot of different private locators, we've started to see patterns here in terms of some private locators. We kind of look at XYZ locating. Oh yeah, those guys, we've had problems with them on other sites where people have hired them. And unfortunately, I just kind of hate to do this, but we've kind of gotten to the point where we've kind of had to blacklist some of them and tell our clients, we suggest these 2 or 3 companies to do your private locates, and we don't really consider company XYZ to be competent at doing this, and you could run into problems. They may be the cheapest, but you're not really managing your risk when you're doing it that way.
No, perfect answer. And I know your policy, Randy. I've I've experienced you guys walking off site, receiving locates, and I'll review them and say, yeah, this one's not really up to snuff, and you'll shut the job down. So, but I commend you on that, because there's a lot of contractors that don't do that.
If I could jump in here, guys, too, Randy, you hit it on the head. I think private locating has become such a big thing now, right? It's, everybody's educated on it now, and, there's more and more companies popping up. And I think what gives Grant and team like a bad rap to private locating companies, or you have, small companies, it could be small, large, whatever, they are, they come from the public locate world. Great. That's a great place to start. But that doesn't mean they're automatically just a private locator, because they're going to go hook behind the meter and use their same EM device, right, to just go on the other side of it. There's so much more to it. The training, the technical aspects, what to look for, the tools, the technology, all this stuff is so different. And so a lot of times people are like, well, I called the private locator, and I'm like, okay, well, what did they do? And you right away understand, and Randy could tell probably by the marks on the ground, is they basically just did a public locate behind the meter, but they didn't look for anything else outside of what they can see. That kind of stuff starts to give it a bad rap, because they're not getting really what they should be getting.
Right.
Right,
And
in the
exactly. And I agree with you 100%. And that's why we created the best practices with NAPUA. And everybody on this panel is part of our task committee. And it's a great document that'll be released very shortly. So we're getting short on time and I want to answer questions. So I'm going to do a quick summation of what we've talked about, but I really want to bring it back to risk and talk about risk because that's really what it all comes down to. And who's responsible for that risk. Because at the end of the day, and I've said this earlier, that we're not insurance policies. Neither is the person that's digging. Ultimately, if you equate it to the public side, the utility owners, the Atmos gases, the Enbridge gas, the Encores, the power companies, they know where their assets are. They have records, and they have someone locate them. We are usually going in blind. We don't have records, and we have no form of verification. Because that's that key word I come back to, Mike, from earlier. Verification is key. If you don't have verification, right? And if you look at the SOO standard, it says all geophysical methods have a moderate risk, right? When you're designing. But however, a moderate risk comes with records and a site walkthrough and looking at appurtenances and everything. And then you do your geophysical locates, and then you provide a SOO drawing that has a level B, and it comes with a moderate risk that something could be missed. When you start taking that information away that we need, the risk is no longer a moderate risk, it's a high risk. And I say many times, like, I can help reduce your risk. I can't eliminate it as a private locator. So who bears that risk? Well, that risk ultimately is owned by the private landowner, whoever owns that infrastructure that's privately owned in the ground. So, but many times they don't understand that they are asset owners. They are utility owners. And many times they don't realize that they have to manage and provide information to the locator or to the excavator, or know their role, right? So, and that's why records are key. But you know what? That's why we're good at what we do, because most of these asset owners don't have records. They don't exist, or they didn't understand the importance of them, and they got lost in the shuffle and they got thrown out or whatever. So it really comes down to when we provide a locate. Okay, this is Mike, you give your client a locate. The number one thing that they should be doing with that locate, because it's a safety practice, is then saying, okay, I've got the locate. I'm going to go back to the utility owner, the asset owner, the landowner of the property and say, hey, did Mike's company get it right? And a lot of times they're going to look at you funny, but you want an answer for them because it's their asset. They're the ones that ultimately should decide how safe digging is done around their assets. And when they don't understand that risk, they need to be educated. And that's what we're doing with NAPUA as well, is we're hoping to educate asset owners and teach them how to be utility owners. So when it comes down, I'm trying to bring it together, private locating, damage prevention specialist, private locating is when I think of a private locator, they're just marking out private lines, on the private side. I believe they've evolved over the years into the damage prevention specialist, because we look at so many other factors, and what we do is very technical. And I think we've all evolved. And it's funny because there's a lot of good companies out there that they've learned the hard way, like I have. And it's not something that they were taught. It's something that they had to figure out on their own after many damages and damage investigations and connecting the dots. So with that being said, I hope I answered the question and what we wanted to accomplish here, but we do have some questions. Does one of our moderators want to read the questions? And one of us will go ahead and answer.
Hey, Grant.
Hey, Roger.
Are there any recognized standards or criteria for the information contained within the locate report?
There is not. And I think I may have briefly talked about it earlier, is private locating industry is not regulated. We don't have any standards that we follow. And again, that's why we created the North American Private Utility Association to bring some credibility to what we do and bring a standard so that, Mike and Donovan and Dustin can say, we follow NAPUA's best practices. And then what quality of information you're getting, right? So yeah, there isn't anything that says how we should do our job. It's you're as the ground disturbance professional, you're rolling the dice. And that's the problem in our industry. How do you know who you're hiring if you don't understand the job? You need to know exactly what I know so that you can hire the proper professional. So, and it's one of the things that we teach in Know Before You Dig training through owner safety. Does that answer your question there, Roger?
I think it does. They can tell us. Brian Greaves says, I find many clients are just unaware of what we need. So as a private locate service provider, do you provide clients with a checklist prior to mobilizing a damage prevention specialist regarding things like field requirements, liabilities, access to buildings, drawings, records, risk, as an education piece, since the client may not know what they need to provide?
Yeah, I could jump in on that one. Yeah, we do that all the time, and every job site, as these guys will say, are different. And then the other part of that is, Roger, when you get there, that job site might even be different than from what they've described, whether it was on the email, the phone, or the, or the scope of worksheet. So it is very important. Communication is really important. Talking about the liability, talk about the things we're going to looking for, asking the right questions from your CSRs. And then also when the technician is en route, they're going to look at the scope of work. They're going to look at the images or the documentation that came to get a game plan in their head. So when they get there, and then when they get there, they generally have more questions. I think the tough thing is, and maybe some of these guys will agree, that the majority of the job sites we go to, you would think somebody would be there to kind of like help us walk through it. Most of the time I see Donovan shaking his head. Donovan's shaking his head. No, they're not. And, you have this large project and you understand what they're trying to do, and where they're digging and stuff. But there's sometimes no one of knowledge to that property. And many times there's no one from that field crew who's going to actually be saying, here's what we need done. We just know that we have to mark everything, right? And so it becomes challenging, but that's our jobs. We're investigators of sorts, right? To kind of figure that out to the best of our ability. But yeah, all of that communication is important. And I also saw Susan Bowles' question on the positive response. And I think all of these companies that are on here do this, where we call them service reports are positive response. I think those guys probably do as well. But you should have the technician's name, number, email, what he's done, all of that information in order to be able to understand what was done beyond the paint and the flag. So Susan, I think everybody on here is doing that.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in, can you tell me what a positive response is? I'm not sure. We don't use that kind of
with that. That's a Texas
language
term.
up here.
It's just basically, it's a little bit different down here in Texas with positive response. I don't know. It's probably relevant in other states, but down here, they don't give you a locate report. They just send you an email saying it's been marked and you don't even know it's been marked. So that's what they call a positive response. Go ahead, Mike. Did you say something?
No, you're 100% right. That's all.
So were there any other questions there, Roger?
Yes, Forrest Sim asked, what are the panelists' perspectives on how detailed to be in your limitations statement? Are you very detailed, specify things like the utilities of X material with a X diameter at X depth are unfindable, or do you tend to be more general and vague in your response?
I can answer that. We're very, it depends on what we can see, because if we're talking about diameter, the only diameter you're going to know is sewers. But yeah, we're trying to be as specific as possible. The only thing that we warn our service techs of not doing or not putting on the report is couldn't locate this, driller must hydrovac. We don't direct how they should manage. We provide information. And it's Randy's company or his consultant who he hires or hires him to take our information and figure out what they need to do with the information. We provide information. We don't direct people how to dig. Now, if they say, hey, you know what, you couldn't tone the water ring loop that goes around the building, what should I do? Well, as a professional, I'll give them suggestions. Verbally, it'll say, okay, well, the water, you can measure all the valves and all the water lines there. Then you have a depth, and you know how deep that water line is at a foot or two, and then you have a vacuum excavation depth to make sure you're not going to hit that ring loop, or go behind a hydrant because we know a hydrant's an endpoint and you can drill safely behind a hydrant. Things like that, you can help them, guide them when they ask questions. But we never put that information on our locate reports. We just give the information of what we could and could not do. And a lot of the times, we don't have, because we have no records, I'll give you an example. We have a series of transformers that go around the property, and we don't know how many cables go in and out of these transformers, or if they're in direct buried, or if they're in duct structures. We just see one EM field and we mark one line, but we don't know how wide that structure could be. So we can't get into that level of detail unless we have utility records. And a lot of times the utility records don't have that information anyway. They just show one line going from transformer to transformer. So, that's when we get into adding distance on the tolerance distance. I change that all the time based on the situations that we're dealing with on site. So, we typically don't get too detailed with size of pipe unless it's sewers, and we can measure that and take invert measurements. But did that adequately answer the question?
I think so.
All right. Are there any more questions? We got a few more minutes.
Yes. So it looks like somebody's getting ready to ask a question. So my question is from the things that you got, your experiences you have, what are your takeaways that is the most important thing for clients or stakeholders outside your industry to know about who you are and what you do?
I think the biggest thing I always say is understand what we can and cannot do for you. When they understand our role and the limitations of the equipment that we use and the information that we need, it always makes an easier client private locate relationship. Because when and that's why I created Know Before You Dig training, because it goes through public and private and all the things you need to know. Because over the many, many years, I've been in this industry 36 years. As I would work in the field and working with my guys, and we would educate our clients, they would say, hey, you guys know a lot. Can you teach us? And it was just a constant recording. And so that's when I started doing lunch and learn presentations. And, I think by the time I started creating the online course, it was like 270 slides. So then we got it into an online teachable course because I got tired of repeating myself. And it's a good tool that we use for our clients, because when that happens, when we have that tool available to us to give a client, and then when they take that course, or they hear me talk, or maybe even I'm hoping that some people got that light bulb moment today. When those light bulb moments happen, that's when the level of safety increases, because like I said earlier, it's a process. A lot of people treat it as, I made the call, we're good. But there's so much more after that. And we really need to make sure that they understand our role and what we can and cannot do for them. And I hope I answered that adequately. Does anybody else want to chime in on that?
No, I think you nailed it. I saw, I think Raymond said, should all locators be trained as specialists? That would be great, right?
Yeah.
But the part of that is, it is broken up into two industries, public and private, unfortunately, but it is. And so, you're a large public company, then you have, 300 technicians just marking fiber or gas. They're just going to get trained on that. It's more cost effective. They don't have to go spend, however many tens of thousands of dollars on GPR units and routers and push-pull cameras and all that stuff. So the way the industry is set up now, everyone isn't trained to mark everything, and everyone is not trained to use all the tools, which is why you do have separate specialists like the teams on this call here that do that.
Oh, and I agree. And you hit a good point there. There's so many different technologies out there to help us find what's in the ground. You've got EM locate equipment. It's not all equal. There's some that are better than others. So do you know if they're using good equipment? There's GPR. but there's many types of GPR. There's multi-channel. There's ones you pull behind your car, and you can map out a whole mall with a multi-channel GPR and pull it behind your vehicle and get really good data. But that's going to cost you a boatload of money. You know, you might as well have done a STU study at the beginning of the project. You know, there's so many different things that you can employ, or you do what some contractors do, and they get just frustrated. And they hydrovac everything, right? Or they hand dig everything. So there is a way to do it safely. It just comes down to money. That's the big thing. If they have a cheap budget or whatever, and they don't want to spend the money, then they're setting themselves up for damages. And I think I talked to Roger earlier today about, you know, some contractors just incorporate the cost of the damages in the job, and they're okay with that because that's what they've been used to over the many years, right? So we have to shift a mindset and get contractors understanding what that damage prevention specialist is, that we as private locate contractors can be leveraged to help them reduce risk. And that's what it really comes down to is what we've evolved into over the many years is a great tool. And again, with NAPUA, we're trying to bring some cohesion to our industry so that when you call one a NAPUA certified or NAPUA accredited or whatever, we're still working on it because it's a very new association. When you call, you know what you're getting. You know, you're getting a professional that goes above and beyond, and it is a damage prevention specialist, and not just a smaller company that's going to show up and do a passive sweep or an inductive sweep and run a GPR. So
Yeah,
that's what we have to get away from.
If possible, Grant, I'd like to jump in on that point because I really want to squeeze this in before we're finished.
Go ahead.
Us being in the drilling industry, excavation contractor sort of thing, and some of the things that I've talked about are our confidence in the private locators and their methodologies. And as I say, we can recognize some companies that have patterns of incompetence and some that are more competent. What we are really pushing for and are a big proponent of is the crest on your shirt, NAPUA, the Private Utility Association. We want this not to be a bunch of guys who get together to go golfing together. This is going to be, and will be, because I'm familiar with it, is developing standards so that we can go out and say, if we're working on this site, we want the private utilities to be done according to NAPUA standards. And the contractor doing it needs to be using methodologies that are deemed acceptable by industry standard practices. And we can just dictate it that way. It has to be, because we although not being regulated, and we've talked about that before, but having an industry standard procedure and practices for how we do things is critical for us who are doing the excavations to have confidence in the work that's been done. So I applaud you for doing the work and trying to put things together that way.
Well, thanks so much, Randy. And yeah, that's the goal, is to bring us all together. And it's really understanding what's on that piece of paper and understanding the weight of that paper and what it can, what it accomplishes. So, you know, I want to thank, you know, you guys for joining this panel, and Roger for hosting us. And I also want to, you know, commend you on all the work you guys did with the task committee, or the technical advisory and standards committee with NAPUA and with the best practices. They're finished. We're just getting them formatted right now, and hopefully we're going to be releasing them soon. So we've got some good things to come. So I appreciate everybody here. Thank you very much. And I appreciate all the attendees, and you know, commend you for taking the time to listen to us.
Yeah, thank you, Axe team. Appreciate you guys.
Yes, Axe, thank you so much.
Great job.